Hey guys, it's Lohpally here, and today we're going to be going over the tier list for Season 11. So let's just jump right into it. As you can kind of see visually already, we have our S plus, S, A, B, C, D, and F. So to kind of break down the brackets, S plus is basically the best supports that I think are going to be the greatest in the new patch. With the items and the way the landscape plays. S is just going to be still incredibly strong, not truly the elite tier, but you'll pick these quite frequently, and maybe they even do well into certain matchups into the S pluses. A is just functionally good. They're always reliable and stable, probably don't have too many counter pick matchups, and do pretty well in most stages. B is situationally good, but I wouldn't recommend playing them too often as they become really, really difficult to get off the ground in a lot of cases comparatively to the A's, S's, and S pluses. C is you can play them, but you probably won't have very much fun. D is basically they don't work in the current game state, and F is a waste of time, and your teammates will most likely dodge when you pick these champions. So let's just jump into the top side of the bracket, which is going to be our S pluses. So coming into the new season, we're going to be having a couple of important support items into the game called Imperial Mandate, which is when you put CC on somebody, it does bonus magic damage for you, and it will tag them with a Sun-like proc, where if your teammate hits them with a spell or an ability or an auto attack, they will deal magic damage also. Because of this, and the introduction of Liandry's no longer needing the Rylai's Crystal Scepter, and another burn item called Demonic Embrace being introduced, this is going to make some of the new support champion landscape change a lot. So right now, I think that melee assassins are going to be incredibly powerful. So we have Lulu coming in as one of the best support champions. She's one of the champions that peels and shields her teammates very well. She does well against assassins in most cases, and her build path is quite linear. Because of the fact that you can get Relic on Lulu and you don't need that much CDR on this champion, she comes in as one of the best champions, and she'll be paired really well because I believe Shield Bow and BT will be kind of the premier build for AD carries once they start getting the hang of the game. And because Lulu pairs really well with all these champions, she will be one of the, if not the best supports in the game. Now, going back to what I was talking about with Liandry's and Demonic Embrace, this means that poke mages are going to be incredibly powerful. So, APMF is going to be one of the comeback supports in this season. You can actually go Imperial Mandate if you want to, too, because their Make It Rain auto-procs the Imperial Mandate. But in most cases, you're going to see yourself going Liandry's and Demonic Embrace. That means that your laning phase is going to be really, really good with the changes to Spell Thieves. Now, if you don't know, Spell Thieves is going to be giving 20 gold instead of 15 gold per stack. That means that if you're playing poke champions, you're going to be getting a lot of income as long as you're consistently poking, and MF is great at that. Same thing with Zyra. Zyra's plants are exceptionally strong at proccing the burns, and she's really, really good at poking and prodding. So these come in at the elite tier because they're super lane dominant, whereas Lulu comes in as an elite tier because of the fact that she's going to go pairing really well with the AD carries and do well against the meta, which will probably most likely be melee assassins. So jumping into our S. S is kind of the category of still exceptionally strong champions, but clearly not a cut above the rest, which are going to be Seraphine, Brand, Leona, Yuumi, and Pyke. Now, these each have different reasons why they're incredibly strong. So we'll start with Seraphine. Seraphine can proc Imperial Mandate from her slow and her charm, so she actually has really good itemization in the new season, but not so much in the early season of this season. You can build her relatively tanky, so she actually does really, really well against a lot of the melee assassins. You can go Ninja Tabby into Locket, you can build a Knight's Vow, a Zeke's also. So you have a lot of access to really defensive tools if you need to, but you can also play her like an enchanter if you feel like people aren't going to dive you. Going Imperial Mandate, Redemption, Ardent, and the new Staff of Flowing Water is actually exceptionally powerful at powering up your entire team since your W can go on everybody. Brand does well for a lot of the reasons why Zyra and MF do well, which is the new burn item, Demonic Embrace, and Liandry's are incredibly powerful, and actually because of the fact that they buffed the E to now be a good harass tool, you can actually farm gold pretty well on him. On top of this, because of the fact that you're going to be fighting quite frequently and having high damage sources is going to make him a really, really big powerhouse. Now, a lot of people will ask, why doesn't that make him an S plus tier? The main reason is short range. A lot of the Liandry's Rylai's combo beforehand gave Brand a lot of extra HP, and because he was short range, you really needed that. Since you're not building as much HP anymore, you're a bit squishier, so it's easier for you to get one shot. Even though the items make him really, really potent in laning phase and can scale up into the late game pretty easily. Now, Leona comes in as pretty much the only premier tank support that I feel like kind of got away scot-free, and the reason for this is because of the fact that Leona has always had really good matchups into mages. Since mages are really powerful right now, Leona has a lot of engaged tools and enough innate tankiness with her W that she can kill people pretty easily. You'll usually build Locket on her, and then after that, the world's kind of your oyster in terms of whatever you want to end up getting. Now moving into Yuumi, one of the only champions that I felt like got a buff from the Presence of Mind changes. So Presence of Mind in the new season will no longer grant you 500 bonus mana, 100 each takedown up to 5. So because of this, her E costs less, but it will still refund you mana. This, combined with the fact that I think Moonstone and Knight's Vow will be an incredible combination on this champion because Knight's Vow no longer has the limiting factor of ranged effectiveness, this will make her actually a really good pairing with a lot of different AD carries and pseudo bruisers. Like I said before, I'm pretty sure once people start getting the hang of it, AD carries will lean more towards bruiser-like items like Shield Bow and BT, running overheal, and Yuumi does really well with those kinds of pairings. Moving on to Pyke. Pyke comes in as pretty much one of the greatest picks because of the fact that a lot of people are going to be one-shotting, and Pyke loves one-shots. On top of this, Duskblade actually solves a lot of the problems that Pyke usually has, which is that if you use your hook and your stun on somebody, and then you are looking for an ultimate, the ultimate puts you in harm's way in the middle of a team fight. Well, Duskblade will allow you to, when you're getting resets, stealth you automatically, meaning that you can play a lot more aggressive and snowball the games quite easily. Remember also that I told you that most of the game favors a lot of damage in the game, so the matchups you're playing against, like MF, Zyra, Yuumi, Brand, etc., will all be really squishy targets that you can do well against. So, moving into the A tier, which is kind of like a, not bad. They can function pretty well, but I wouldn't recommend them as a cut above everyone else. So, Annie support. Annie is good just because of the fact that she has a lot of engaged tools, and she can use a couple of the items pretty reasonably well. Imperial Mandate if you're looking for front-loaded damage, but in most cases I think you're going to actually go for Shurelia's Reverie because this champion just wants to engage. Even though she can shield her teammates, I feel like for the most part this change didn't do basically anything and just mostly put Annie on the radar of people who want to play an engaged mage support. Moving on to Rakan. Rakan also kind of functions the same way, where he does really well with some of the new items like Shurelia's and Staff of Flowing Water in combination, because then you can dash to someone with your E, give them a shield, and give bonus movement speed and AP to you and him. Because he leverages these items reasonably well, but his damage is kind of on the lower end and he doesn't do super well in laning phase, he comes in as a really good anti-assassin if you can get over the laning phase hump. After that, we're going to move into Morgana. Now, Morgana comes in as an A because of two things. One is that she can proc Spell Thieves really, really well by going Mana Flow and using her pool on the wave/players. So she can farm exceptionally well and get to that item first. Now, her flexibility is really her strength because if you're playing lots of front-to-back team fights where you're hitting consistent bindings, you can go Imperial Mandate and give a ton of front-loaded damage to your team. You also have options to go Shurelia's on this champion, which makes her a little bit more flexible, and even Moonstone isn't terrible on her since you can pool to constantly proc it and keep yourself in combat. In most cases, though, I would recommend, since you can get to your first item really fast, since Spell Thieves gives you a large injection of gold, that you go Zhonya's beforehand, as this champion is one of the few champions that I recommend skipping your mythic item and coming back for it later. Because of the fact that she has reasonably good laning phase, and she hard counters a lot of CC champions, she does really, really well, but only if you're getting the income for it. After that, we're moving to Ashe support. Really weird probably to see this champion on the list, but she is a great utility support with the new items. So first off, your volley and ultimate will proc Imperial Mandate. So you can actually, even though there's a little bit of lost AP, Imperial Mandate makes it exceptionally good at using and buffing a lot of damage for your team. After that, you can actually go things like Zeke. So you can actually build her more traditional than you used to. Black Cleaver is also not a bad secondary, but Zeke's is also really, really, really good for this champion. Since anytime you put a debuff on somebody and slow them down, then your teammate can hit them with spells or abilities or auto attacks and deal bonus damage. As you can kind of see the thematic element of it, you're constantly buffing damage. Plus, because of the fact that you have Hawkshot, you can now keep track of your teammates and your opponents, so you can keep track of where the jungler is going, and you have initiation via the arrow. Because she lanes really, really well in the early stages, and once again, we've established Spell Thieves is quite powerful at generating income, you can get to your income really, really fast and crush lane. Next coming in is Thresh. I found Thresh to just be a good, stable, all-around support. still around, still utilizes all the CC, and his build paths really haven't changed. You're going to probably build Locket on most cases if you want to be tanky, Shirley's if you're looking to engage, but you can also, if you start to snowball, build Imperial Mandate on him, and I've actually found that this combo with a lot of extra CDR feels really satisfying, and you can actually give your team a lot of extra damage. Because of his flexibility, he's just super good in most matchups and sets up ganks pretty well. After that, Zillion comes in because, once again, Imperial Mandate kind of buffs him up, and Shirelia's. On top of that, we've kind of established that there's going to be a lot of one-shot Wonderland or Assassins in the game, so Zillion does well to counter these, plus he gives his teammates EXP in the laning phase, so that is quite potent at making them tankier. Moving on to Vel'Koz, as we've kind of established with things like Zyra and Brand, Vel'Koz is really powerful because of the fact that he can poke and utilize the burn items quite well. The reason why he doesn't come in as maybe an S or an S+, is just because of the fact that he's a lot easier to jump on, and his skill shots actually require you, well, to hit skill shots, whereas Zyra and Brand are a lot easier to play. After that, Soraka. One of the other champions that I felt like actually used Moonstone reasonably well because of the fact that you can silence and disrupt a lot of crowd control that's coming in. Plus, I think you can actually keep people alive quite frequently with Moonstone, and Redemption is a secondary item. This champion just does a good job of stonewalling a lot of assassin one-shots, and if you can keep your teammates alive and they build reasonably tanky, then you can kind of turn fights quite frequently. After that, we're looking at Swain. Champion a lot of people always ask me about, and I've never been too big of a fan of. But now with all the frequency of fighting and how strong AP mages are, Swain's actually a pretty good one. You can build Imperial Mandate, you can go a Glacial Super Soaker build, or you can just build Leandries. All are pretty exceptional ones, but just making sure that you get his Zonias as a second item is pretty important. Because of the fact that he can pair really well with all these CC champions like Jhin, Ashe, etc., he lanes really, really well, and since his E goes through minions, you can actually score kills and snowball quite frequently. After that, we have Bard, which is, once again, just a really good roaming champion, being able to always be there first for every team fight. His flexibility is really, really potent too, because of the fact that you can kind of just build anything. Imperial Mandate's good on him. Moonstone hasn't been too bad. If you want to be tanky, you can go for the Locket build. So because of his flexibility on the item path and basically the ability to roam and score points on the map and give his teammates EXP via not being in lane but getting chimes, he's just really, really powerful. After that is Blitzcrank, since we've already established a lot of champions are going to be reasonably squishy. One hook and you're done. So this champion just does really well in a meta like that, and outside of Morgana, he really doesn't have that many bad matchups. It's mostly just about skill. So moving on to B. These are the champions that I felt like were a little bit under the A tier, or just not nearly as good as the other champions at fulfilling certain roles. So Janna and Nami come in as kind of like a duo in that sense, which is that they just don't really utilize the items nearly as well as champions like Soraka, Yuumi, and Lulu. You can build Locket or Moonstone on them. They're both exceptionally, reasonably good, but they don't use any items super, super well. Mandate's still an option on the table too, but these champions are just relatively a bit weaker, a little bit under the table. After that, we have things like Set, Pantheon, Nautilus, and Maokai. These are all great engaged supports, but they pale in comparison to how tanky a champion like Leona is, and Leona tends to do a lot more damage. Plus, she scales a bit better than all of these champions, so they don't run into a brick wall like the others. One thing to note, though, is Maokai can be good if you get ahead and build AP, and you can set up a lot of brush control via your sap lanes. So that is the one exception to Maokai, but the problem with Maokai is his laning phase is quite weak, because if the enemy doesn't walk towards the brushes and just pushes the waves, your champion basically does nothing. After that is AP champions like Neeko, Xerath, and Ahri, which are all clumped in together because they do a lot of AP damage, but they're relatively short-ranged or immobile. So Xerath runs into problems where he's just too squishy and too easy to jump on by melee assassins without any tools that really help him protect himself. And then Neeko and Ahri, while they're a bit more mobile, have a little bit more difficulty either doing enough damage or leveraging the items very well. So, moving into the C tier, which is going to be things like Lux and Karma. These champions are just relatively bad because there's too skill shot dependent, or they just don't have the numbers behind them. Why would I want to play Karma with shields when I could play something like Lulu instead? It just doesn't really seem to be a reasonable thing. Plus, Karma doesn't have any on-demand CC. Her snare takes a while to go off. It's not instantaneous, so it's hard for her to peel. On top of this, things like the removal of Athene's actually makes things like Karma and Lux way worse, because that supplemented their lack of numbers by being able to bump up their shields with the extra healing. Now that they don't have that as an access, Moonstone isn't really an adequate replacement for it. They struggle to actually deal enough damage / bring enough utility or healing to really warrant their existence. After that, Alistar and Galio. The biggest problem I have with these two champions is they're just not tanky enough and don't do enough damage in the all-in to warrant their existence comparatively to their competitors. So things like Nautilus tend to do a lot more damage, and Set tend to be more tanky. After that, Senna. While Senna isn't like super terrible, the biggest problem is Senna just doesn't have ways to survive if people are piling on her. On top of this, her build path is relatively kind of boring. She doesn't really do nearly as much damage anymore. It takes a really long time with you playing really aggressive and risking a lot to get very low output. So rather see Senna in the ADC role, and so that's why she's kind of weaker. And then Veigar is a little bit on the weaker side too, just because he needs to farm too much and scale too much to really bring in a powerhouse, and that's not what you get from a support role. After that, moving into D. So some people are mostly curious about the Sona in D. So, main things that went into this were the tier changes and presence of mind. So let's tackle them each one by one, which is presence of mind will no longer give the 500 extra mana. And the takedown mana is down to 15%. That means that you're already going to struggle in the mana department on Sona. Another thing to note too is if you haven't noticed, Sona's abilities cost 30 more and then refund 30 more mana when you are next to a person who gives them the aura. This combined with the effectiveness of Tear the Goddess, which is refunds 15% of your mana, meant that really expensive spells that then returned mana helped refill your mana bar. Well, the main things to note is the new Tear the Goddess will no longer have this feature and be relatively cheaper. But on top of that, Archangels no longer have spell haste, which is an incredibly important stat on this champion. So because of this, you don't really have a great way to endgame build, and you tend to run almost every team fight, even if you run Presence of Mind and Mana Flow, which also makes you incredibly squishy and easy to kill. So she comes in as the D tier until they do some kind of changes in that regard. She also doesn't utilize pretty much any of the mythics that well, as they all are pretty mediocre on her. Shen also comes in as relatively weak just because of the fact that most of the champion matchups he used to have, he doesn't do that great into and doesn't leverage most of the items well. Moving on to the F tier is basically champions that don't have engages but are tanky champions. So you kind of see here that Braum, Taric, Tahm Kench, Trundle, etc. I think that tanks in general won't be very prevalent, will be mostly Bruiser or tanky champions in that sense in the via of bruiserness. So Trundle comes in as a relatively weak champion because you won't have stats to steal from him. And then Braum and Tahm Kench struggle because if you're playing against mages, you'll get poked out and you won't have any way to engage. So your champion is relatively weak. Plus, I don't think the items are really that favorable for tank supports at this current time. And then Taric struggles because of the fact that, as we've talked about with Sona, there's going to be a lot of missing mana items. And Taric is someone who's very mana hungry, so he needs a lot of that to do it. Anyway, guys, hope you guys enjoyed this video and liked the breakdown for the tier list. If you do like this kind of format, make sure to let me know in the comment section below so I can do more of these. And let me know what champions you think will be really popular in the Season 11. Thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you next time. Peace.